Hello learners, welcome. Today we are looking at a one-act play titled The Zoo Story, written by the American playwright Edward Albee. The play was originally titled Peter and Jerry. It explores the themes of isolation, loneliness, miscommunication, social disparity and dehumanization in a commercial world through two characters, Peter and Jerry. These are two strangers who meet in a park. In short, you will see that this play is a criticism of the American way of life. Dear learners, before we start the detailed study of the play, let us have a brief look and overview of American drama in the early 20th century. Although the American theatrical tradition can be traced back to the arrival of Lewis Hallam's troupe in the mid-18th century, it attained international status only in the 1920s and 30s. With the works of Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller. Later American playwrights of importance include Edward Albee, Sam Shepard, David Mamet, Wendy Wasserstein and August Wilson. Edward Albee played a prominent role in the theatrical scene. Right from his first play, The Zoo Story, he left a mark of his own. His early works reflect a mastery and Americanization of the theatre of the absurd that found its peak in works of European playwrights such as Samuel Beckett, Eugene Ionesco and Jean Genet. Now let us have a brief look at the theatre of the absurd. A term coined by Hungarian critic Martin Eslin, it refers to a particular type of play which first became popular during the 1950s and the 1960s and which presented on stage the philosophy articulated by the French philosopher Albert Camus in his 1942 essay The Myth of Sisyphus. In this essay, he defines the human condition as basically meaningless. The playwrights, loosely grouped under the label of the absurd, attempt to convey their sense of bewilderment, anxiety and wonder in the face of an inexplicable universe. While the traditional theatre attempts to create a photographic representation of life as we see it, the theatre of the absurd aims to create a ritual-like, mythological, archetypical, allegorical vision closely related to the world of dreams. The focal point of these dreams is often man's fundamental bewilderment and confusion. Albee's very first play, The Zoo Story, was performed in 1959. The play's genius is the way in which it manages to gain our sympathy for the aggressive Jerry and to deflect it from the mild-mannered Peter. The zoo is of course America, where half live like human beings and the other half live like animals. Like the absurdist, he believes that man has lost his faith in everything, yet there is some hope in Albee's in man's ability to face his true condition and thus his salvation. It is interesting to see the life of an author and to examine the factors that lead to his or her creativity. So, let us take a look at the story of Edward Albee and the story behind his Zoo Story. Edward Franklin Albee III was born on March 12, 1928 and was adopted by millionaire couple Reed and Frances Albee at the age of 2 weeks. Reed Albee was the son of Edward Franklin Albee, a rich and powerful early American vaudeville producer. An only child, Edward grew up in a privileged household. However, his adoptive parents were uncommunicative and cold, and his mother controlling. To her, it was of utmost importance that Edward attend the right schools and associate with the right people. By age 20, Albee was estranged from his bourgeois family and had moved to New York's Greenwich Village. An inheritance from his grandmother allowed Albee to live in the New York City, where he continued to write with little success, and he did some odd jobs. After a period of depression, he challenged himself to write a play before his 30th birthday. Albee said, "I finished Zoo story in 3 weeks. Everything in my life had led to this moment. The writing seemed to flow from some inner need and convention. It was sort of an explosion, and the words never stopped." Rejected by several New York City publishers, the Zoo story made its way to Europe, where it premiered on September 28, 1959 at the Schiller Theater in Werkstatt, Germany. 4 months later, after much critical praise in Germany, it returned to New York City at the Provincetown Playhouse in Greenwich Village, and instantly had a strong impact on critics and audiences alike. This marked the beginning of Albee's career as a playwright. In 2004, Albee expanded the Zoo story into a 2-act play. After garnering its initial critical praise, the Zoo story went on to win the Village Voice Award for Best Play and ran for a total of 582 performances. Zoo story continues to be a favorite with university and small theatre companies and persists in shocking and profoundly affecting its audiences. Some critics consider Albee's play as a severe satire against American society to show people how they are and what their time is like, in the hope that perhaps they'll change it. His works are considered well-crafted, often unsympathetic examinations of the modern condition. His other plays include The Sandbox, which was published in 1959, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which was published in 1962, and an adaptation of Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's, which was published as The Goat or Who is Sylvia, which was published in 2002. The Zoo story has been called the most impressive debut ever made by an American playwright. It is a long 1-act play in which nothing happens except conversation until the violent ending. The story, in simplest terms, is about how a man who is consumed with loneliness starts up a conversation with another man on a bench in Central Park and eventually forces him to participate in an act of violence. While Peter is reading a book on a bench in Central Park, he is interrupted by Jerry, a total stranger who announces that he has just been to the zoo. Anxious to return to his reading, Peter reacts with merely vague interest and lights his pipe, but he is immediately made uncomfortable by Jerry's queries about his marital status, children, work, menage of cats and parakeets. after repeating that he has been to the zoo and that Peter will read about it in the papers the next day, if he does not see that in the television that very night, Jerry follows several digressions about sociological class distinctions, literary taste, and his day-long wanderings. He also gives a detailed description of his rooming house and its characters on Upper West Side. Peter is embarrassed to hear these sordid details. Jerry goes on and on about his life, even describing his landlady's dog, who happens to be an integral character in this play. He explains how his inability to be friendly with the dog leads to his conclusion that no contact with people is ever possible. This story has a hypnotic effect on Peter, who makes no comment during its lengthy recitation. Grotesquely exhausted at the end of the story, Jerry sits down on the bench beside Peter and sees that he has annoyed and confused Peter instead of making a breakthrough in communication. Peter, suddenly playful, he tickles Peter's rib, driving Peter into almost hysterical laughter. Many such actions follow, which eventually lead to the accidental death of Jerry off Peter's hands. Before his death, Peter is transfixed as Jerry, with faint laughter, tries to summarize in broken, disjointed sentences his knowledge of his own actions. The world he has found is a zoo, and he thanks Peter for ending his anguished life. Slowly wiping clean the knife handle with his own kerchief, Jerry urges Peter to run away. The play ends when Peter groans as he feels troubled, then repeats, "Oh my God," many times. Let us now look at the characterization in the play. As you have seen, this one-act play concerns two major characters, Peter and Jerry. Peter is a middle-class publishing executive with a wife, two kids, daughters, two cats and two parakeets. He is a man in his early 40s, neither fat nor gaunt, neither handsome nor homely. He wears tweeds, smokes a pipe and carries horn-rimmed glasses. Although he is moving into middle age, his dress and his manner would suggest a man younger. While Jerry, on the other hand, is an isolated and disheartened man. He is a man in his late 30s who is not poorly but carelessly dressed. What was once a trim and lightly muscled body has begun to go to fat, and while he is no longer handsome, it is evident that he once was. His fall from physical grace should not suggest debauchery. He has, to come closest to it, a great weariness. These men meet on a park bench in New York City's Central Park. Here we have clearly delineated characters as they resemble normal American citizens of that period. There are two main characters that perform in the play. However, the action of a third is introduced of the elusive landlady. The first character we hear from Jerry, who is the only willing to talk character in the play. Peter, on the other hand, prefers his books to his fellow human beings. Peter represents the upper middle class of New York City, the biggest city in the world, and Jerry belongs to a lower class. The two characters differ or even contrast from the very beginning in their ideas, interests, behavior, or even appearance. And Albee said in an interview, "I was always delivering telegrams to people in rooming houses. I met the models for all those people in the play in rooming houses. Jerry, the hero, is still around." Throughout the play, Jerry was trying to transmit a message to Peter. He uses many techniques involving repetition in each. He first tells him about the visit to the zoo, then questions him about his life, the way that irritated Peter. He tells stories of his miseries in life, his lusty landlady, the fierce dog, his neighbors. When all that failed, he paid his life as a price to complete his message. The people Jerry described are real Americans that Albee wants to bring to light. Now, let us look at the way language is used in this play. Albee uses language as a magician, depicting pictures of a real human being that one will not doubt about it being a friend, a relative, a man in the news, or even oneself, with the language that suits the content. The first tactic used by Albee in this play is repetition, as the opening line repeats itself. The opening line, "I have been to the zoo," repeats itself many times. Jerry's center of speech is what happened in the zoo, as he repeats this type of motivating story to get Peter involved in the conversation. Peter is obviously the weaker link in that line. He tries over and over to show ignorance, annoyance, or rejection. The beginning goes on in a slow pattern with short sentences. Jerry asks all the questions. Peter reluctantly comments, "I don't want to hear any more." This happens while Jerry tries to know and hack into Peter's life. The pace is quickened as Jerry tells his stories about the landlady and the dog. Thence the speech is prolonged and the repetition is present as in the whole play. One of the most important aspects of absurd drama is its distrust of language as a means of communication, which is clearly depicted by Albee in this play. Language, it seems to say, has become nothing but a vehicle for conventionalized, stereotyped, meaningless exchanges. Thus, we can see here that repetitions in the conversations are Jerry's attempts to communicate with another human being, but he is not able to do so. Much of the dialogue in absurdist drama, especially in Albee's play, reflects this kind of elusiveness and inability to make a connection. When language that is apparently nonsensical appears, it also demonstrates this disconnection. Despite its reputation for nonsense language, much of the dialogue in absurdist play is naturalistic. The moments when characters resort to nonsense language or cliches, when words appear to have lost their denotative function, thus creating misunderstanding among the characters, make the theatre of the absurd distinctive. Let us now have a look at the setting of the play. As you have already understood, setting is an important aspect of any play. It helps in highlighting the themes and the plot, and it is also crucial in determining the success of the play. In the zoo story, the action is set, as you've already seen, in the Central Park in the middle of New York City. It is one of the busiest and the most populated cities in America and also perhaps in the world. New York as the setting is ideal as the entire play is about American social life. New York stands for the ideal American style of life and identity. The play takes place on a Sunday afternoon in summer and the time is the present. The stage settings are minimal. It has to be noted here that this is also a very crucial characteristic feature of the theatre of the absurd. There are two park benches, one towards either side of the stage. They both face the audience. Behind them, foliage, trees, and sky. At the beginning, Peter is seated on one of the benches. Near the end, Jerry will produce a knife and a sight of blood follows. And this is where the main action takes place. However, through the conversation that goes on between Jerry and Peter, we also have a word picture of the 4-story rooming house where Jerry lives with its inhabitants and some of their daily routine. He describes the rooms of every floor and their inhabitants. Jerry and his neighbors are of the same class and share the same sufferings of badly off life. This place is described in detail. Peter gives a brief description of his home setup. Thus, we can say that setting plays a major role in this play. Apart from giving a clear indication about the place where the action takes place, the main setting of the play also helps us to identify the social rankings of the major characters. From the setting, it is clearly communicated by Edward Albee that all he is doing is looking at the story of the busy American people who do not even notice that they themselves are living in a zoo. Author, by choosing a relatively free Sunday for the play to take place, also says that even during leisure, a man is not interested in his fellow beings. He is just happy being in a cage. Let us now look at the themes of the play. The zoo story is Albee's masterpiece and the beginning of his great career as a dramatist. In this play, he introduced many themes like that of illusion and reality in modern society, isolation of human existence in a world without God, lack of communication between individuals, and the recurring theme of repetition. Albee has constructed a short but multi-leveled play dealing with issues of human isolation, loneliness, class differences, and the dangers of inaction within American society. The first theme that appears in the play is repetition, with Jerry's phrase, "I have been to zoo," that is repeated 3 times in the first page itself. This indicates from the very beginning the techniques Albee will be using to shoot up the actions. Albee follows the pattern of intensification through repetition. The conversation follows the same sequence of repetition in the sequence of isolation, intrusion, attention, then isolation as the cycle repeats itself. Another important theme is, of course, isolation. Peter in this play stands for average successful American. He leads a comfortable life in the better side of New York City. On the other hand, Jerry's appearance indicates his disillusionment in life. He lives on the other side of the city and of the society. Jerry's possessions look pathetic compared to those of Peter's. They belong to 2 different worlds. The theme of isolation marks both characters, as Peter never likes the idea of paying attention to any other thing rather than his book and bench. Jerry lives in a place where every room is an isolated island. The lack of communication, therefore, is a dominating theme in the play. There is a lack of communication between Peter and Jerry, Jerry and his neighbors, and of course, Jerry and the dog. He uses the same way he used with the dog as a last option to communicate with Peter, and this action costs him his very life. Life as an illusion is also a theme here. The landlady is taken in by the illusion of love shown by Jerry, but the dog understands the illusion and do not respond to Jerry. For Jerry, in order to keep his peace, he is able to convince the landlady of an illusion of love. She believes this ploy and is appeased with it. This suggests that in Albee's world, human contact is a mere lie and can be satisfied with delusion. Though the zoo story ends with death, it ends with a note of hope. Jerry succeeds in attaining some contact with Peter and opens his eyes to the artificiality of his life. Eventually, Peter discovers that the zoo is the world they live in which people live like animals, isolated and unwilling to face their true conditions. Albee wanted to attract our attention in his absurd style to what is behind the masked life we lead, to some of the bad traits we cannot identify with in ourselves in this modern world, namely isolation of human beings and lack of communication or even unwillingness to communicate, of the illusions that block our mind's eye from seeing the true life and our condition on it. He is trying to move us into a better society in a way. So viewers, we saw the play The Zoo Story by Edward Albee and the many aspects that the author discusses in the play. Hope you had a nice time. Thank you.